So, let's talk MLMs, multi-level marketing companies. If you're not familiar, they prey on people by selling them on promises of wealth and autonomy. In reality, they make money from having their salespeople buy excessive amounts of product or attend expensive mandatory training sessions. Profiting off of being part of an MLM is almost a statistical impossibility. They are unquestionably some of the most morally bankrupt business entities out there. To me, MLM discourse presents an interesting unstated question. At what point of return to the participant does an association with an organization stop being a scam and start being a fair, reasonable return for services rendered? Don't worry, I'm not asking for a literal percent here, but just think about it. MLM schemes that immediately put people in the hole with no hope of a return are an obvious and odious evil, but what about your average retail or food service job? Thin though retail margins may be, retail companies like Walmart make billions in profit on the backs of their ill-compensated workers. So ill-compensated, I'll note that many are on what few government anti-poverty programs we do have. Make no mistake about it, the vast majority of the value of their labor is stolen. In fact, essentially all who work in for-profit, non-self-employed jobs have their labor stolen at some level. That's how capitalism works. People are employed to make other people money. How much money those other people make is inversely related to how little they pay out in wages. But I get ahead of myself. Let me show you what I mean with some real analysis. So, at the risk of sounding like a neoliberal elitist bragging about their credentials, I do actually have a master's degree in accounting. I didn't go into accounting and am not an accountant for a variety of reasons. However, I believe I can still provide a decently sound analysis. If accounting sounds like nails on chalkboard to you already, skip to this time code. Right, so, say you work at a McDonald's. You work with 5 other employees on your 8-hour shift. For the sake of simplicity, let's say you have 1,000 customers. Every customer gets a burger, fries, and a drink. At the end of the day, the store cleared about $5,000 in revenue. That's the total sales price of the thing sold times the amount. The direct material cost is about $1,600 or so. Then we need to calculate what you and your coworkers got paid. You and 4 others made the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, and your manager, who made $20 an hour, all total up to about $450 for the day total. Take the $1,600 and the $450 and you get the direct costs for the product that was moved that shift of $2,060. Knock off 4% of the total revenue, or $200 real quick for the McDonald's franchise fee. Subtract out another $250 for the paper and cups used, as well as any other meaningful variable costs incurred in the process, leaving $2,410. Now this next part is the real meat of cost accounting, trying to allocate out fixed and indirect costs to these burgers, fixed costs like rent. As to these fixed costs, well, definitionally, as these costs are fixed, the more product you move, the less cost is allocated to each burger, so these costs are far more ephemeral and abstract. As such, any attempt to meaningfully impart these indirect costs to individual burgers is largely an accounting fiction. At the end of the day, there is just a power bill, a maintenance bill, a bill for general supplies, and so on. Some bills are significantly related to how much product was moved, but most are not. As such, to avoid being here all day, let's say the restaurant is doing well, and assume a cost allocation of 22% of the revenue, or $1,082 for the fixed costs and other meaningful overhead items not mentioned yet, like insurance, payroll taxes, etc. So, finally, all that said, the owner received $1,328 for the day. Of that, as 1/6 of the staff working for that time period, your average individual pre-tax contribution to the owner's wealth was $221. You took home $58 pre-tax. Some would downplay the workers' role in generating this revenue, citing the advanced machines purchased by capital. But here's the thing, this is a restaurant, not a damn vending machine. The machines allow the workers to be more productive, yes, but without the worker, they lie dormant. And while the workers receive the market value of their wages, this value is entirely disconnected from what they actually produced, as we have seen here. I'll note these numbers I used here are based on averages of Quora answers from people who worked there, so useful but still subject to a lot of variability. A lot of this has some fairly large fudge factors, yes, and doesn't note regional differences or other forms of variability, but settle down, Beavis, this is just a number-enhanced thought experiment. There's obviously a lot of other items on the menu, fluctuations in prices, combo and promotional pricing, changes of demand per day, and so on, but you catch my meaning. So, 221 versus 58. The worker is only being paid for 20% of their generated profits. As regrettable as this is, it rings true to me. I would expect people in minimum wage occupations to be definitionally among the most exploited of the labor force. Now, even if you don't trust my calculations and think I materially understated or overstated any costs, allow me to ask you the core question again. What is an acceptable amount of the worker's earned profits to be taken by the owner, who had no role in producing it outside of the initial investment? Even if you don't believe in the wholesale abolishment of private property, surely we can agree that the worker is, in fact, entitled to significantly more of the sweat of their brow. That work, which generates value, entitles the worker to at least enjoy a bare majority of it. I would put to you, they are morally entitled to it. The situation of the minimum wage worker is not called wage slavery for nothing. Now, notably, this analysis starts from the minimum wage worker making the federal minimum wage. Many cities and states have significantly higher minimum wages. In Seattle, they raised the minimum wage north of 15, and surprise, surprise, McDonald's still exists there. McDonald's dealt with this by raising some prices. Turns out people are, in fact, willing to pay slightly higher prices to preserve the dignity of the workers. Who would have thought? Some also responded by cutting hours in some unfortunate cases, which is definitely something that needs to be addressed. Regardless, the net effect is still that workers are able to enjoy more of the fruits of their labor. Anyway, the implications of this analysis aren't limited to those working minimum wage, mind you. Even if you're a software developer pulling north of 6 figures, you should be asking yourself just how much you're being compensated relative to your contributions. You likely intuitively know the asymmetric power of software to generate revenue. An infinitely replicable good usually sold on a reoccurring licensing basis. It's no wonder software companies command such a place on the stock market currently. Calculating the difference between what you generate and what you are paid is an even more complicated proposition here, but is no less valid. Definitionally, you are being shortchanged, and you should ask yourself by how much. Now before we move on to McDonald's here, I need to share with you some interesting figures from a Bloomberg article. These figures are for an average McDonald's franchise location, and they list out what I believe is a GAAP income of $154,000 for the year or so. Notably, this income is after depreciation, which, I'm not about to make the ultimate accounting nuclear take of depreciation isn't real. It most definitely is real in that it attempts to measure a valid decline in capital assets like buildings, vehicles, and whatnot, but its application borders on the farcical, and it is not a cash expense that has to be paid from income. It will become a cash expense if you need to renovate the store or renovate some machines, yes, but I would be very curious about just how many locations are using fully depreciated machinery and buildings. I would expect that after more than 60 years of operations, the machines are very reliable and do not require replacement often. And just how often have you seen a McDonald's being meaningfully renovated? Anyway, point being, I would expect a lot of franchisees to be doing considerably better cash income than this estimated GAAP income. Amusingly, this article is about how unhappy franchise owners are with having to deal with serving all-day breakfast and other corporate mandates from on high. A punchline buried in the article is that the average McDonald's franchise owner owns 6 stores, which is pretty rich in both senses of the word. Point being, the owners are doing just fine, to say the least, unlike those who are in their employ. In my experience, when presented with a reminder of the reality of those in minimum or low-wage employment, people excuse it in a number of predictable ways. The boomer man says, well, they should have planned better, hand-waving a lifetime of uncontrollable systemic factors and changes in the economy that they do not care to understand. The racist says, well, it's because those people have bad family lives, and they should have taken better personal responsibility, eternally twisting the results of centuries of systemic oppression to fit their poisoned worldview. Perhaps most perniciously, the neoliberal says they should have gone to college. They may think that they mean this in an inclusive way, and they may even support policies to make it easier for people to go to college, though hopefully not that one. But when they say this, read between the lines. They do not view non-college educated people as valid. They do not see their labor as worthy of meaningful compensation. Statistically, this is especially striking because barely a third of the people older than 25 in America have college degrees. In saying this shit, they are writing off the vast majority of the country. Also, I'll give you two guesses how this percentage of college grads breaks down on ethnicity. In the self-inflated views of these professional managerial class neoliberals, those who are poor and suffering are in their rightful place. The professional earn their role in the hierarchy fair and square in their view, conveniently ignoring the massive structural advantages they enjoyed along the way. They filled out all the right forms after all. The poor must simply have not wanted a better life enough. It is a deep, pernicious ignorance that drives this elitist disdain for the majority, and it is an ignorance not easily overcome, as it is critical to their understanding of their place in the world. All too often, we on the left, and I include myself in this, fixate on the billionaires and other assorted one-percenters as the source of the political problems in our country. This view fundamentally erases the willing complicity of millions as they maintain their ignorance by looking away from the economic violence done to their fellow human beings, or worse, actively participating in said violence. It is for this reason that I am placing the professional managerial class upon the top of the accursed mastaba that makes up the class dynamics of our economic system. What is a mastaba, you ask? Well, let's get into it. A mastaba is a kind of ancient Egyptian tomb made of clay bricks. I first came across the concept in Pharaoh, a wonderful, in both senses of the word, ancient Egyptian city-building game from 1999. In contrast to pyramids, a mastaba has a flat top, like a trapezoid. It is that feature that makes the structure a much better metaphor for class dynamics than the pyramid. A few times in my life I've come across the edgy phrase, "Capitalism is a pyramid scheme," in various forms. This is an incorrect characterization, because it absolves a massive amount of people who are of paramount importance to the system of institutionalized economic violence. Again, the truth here is that economic exploitation is not merely driven by some small group at the top, or, heaven forbid, a singular person. It is the product of the tireless work of two separate but equally important classes. The capital class, from the stockholder with controlling interest pushing layoffs in a time of supreme profitability, all the way down to the tyrannical small business owner forcing people to clock in later so they don't have to pay out the wages the employees are legally entitled to. It is, of course, them, but it is also the climber professional, who in their heart longs deeply to be in that capital class, who works tirelessly to annihilate their empathy and become more like their bloodless capital class heroes. They are breathlessly loyal to capital, receiving just enough reward and renown for them to perpetually look the other way from what casualties lie in capital's wake. And so it is from this top of the mastaba that the economic oppression flows. This oppression occurs at different scales, yes, and clearly capital gains significantly more from it than the professionals. But it is the combined forces of both that built the world of rent-seeking we inhabit. To my eye, this is a more complete explanation for the continued existence of systems of economic oppression than merely pointing the finger at capital. After all, if the source of problems was merely the capital class, even with electoralism's extremely questionable ability to change things, capital would not be able to dominate to the extent it does now. The depraved indifference of both parties to the working class keeps the working class perpetually under capital's heel. Specifically, this economic oppression is the upward transfer of wealth from the body of the mastaba to the top. It is in the wage theft we looked at earlier. It is in how housing is treated like an investment first and a necessity for people second. It is in the wretched state of our for-profit healthcare system here in America. It is in the never-ending push for the privatization of public services by efficiency fetishizing wonks, devastating the underserved communities who relied on those services and can no longer afford them. It is baked into too many structural elements of society to even count, and a sizable amount of the cultural milieu that surrounds us has arisen to justify it. Take, for example, a seemingly innocuous first question we often ask people upon meeting them. So, what do you do? Ask yourself why that question has such precedence. It is a sanitized way to ask, where do you fit in the economic hierarchy? Even if asked with the best intentions and genuine curiosity, it has deeply classist implications. For people doing well in their careers, this seems like an easy question to answer, and a logical jumping-off point for a conversation. For people who are economically suffering, it's basically a microaggression. If you have any doubts about contemporary American society being structured with the professional class as the default, I would point you to our healthcare system as perhaps the greatest evidence. Even with the paltry band-aid of reforms introduced by the Affordable Care Act, the system only somewhat respects those professionally employed who receive good health benefits from their employer. The disparities in outcomes between the classes is stark. How often do you hear of a professional who died from trying to ration their insulin? You don't, and therein exposes the difference. Meanwhile, the casualties of the working class are in the tens of thousands every year. And that's without even getting into the suffering caused by untreated non-lethal conditions. The difference in wealth should not be a death sentence, and it should not be the difference between suffering and not. The continued existence of such a system deeply reflects the tolerance for economic violence of the professional class. Make no mistake, economic violence is violent, and it does kill. This is one of the most significant ways how. Fortunately, this tolerance of economic violence does appear to be wavering somewhat in the public's eye for healthcare, but that shift is certainly not reflected in our politics yet, to say the least. In rejecting policies like Medicare for All, the Democratic Party continues its decades-long project of centering the party around the professional class at the cost of the working class. The results of this project, more than anything else, are why Hillary lost, after all. Despite the litany of reasons party insiders pick from to explain the loss that conveniently do not require any meaningful introspection of the character of the party, it is not hard to see why the working class would not trust a Democratic Party, as the party has little to offer them now. Many give up and stop voting. Some are welcomed by the hateful siren song of the Republican Party, a party which has even less interest in meaningfully advancing the material conditions of the working class than the Democrats, of course. But perhaps to the ear of the disaffected voter, an ignorant and hateful diatribe feels far more real than a plastic assurance followed by a knife to the back. If you're interested in reading more on this dynamic, I would suggest picking up a copy of Thomas Frank's book, Listen, Liberal. I would also like to quickly call out tax policy specifically as a means of rewarding the upper echelon at the cost of the working classes. The tax rates for the rich have fallen tremendously under Bush, Obama, Trump, all. Meanwhile, a non-trivial amount of people believe firmly in raising income taxes on the poor, ensuring that every citizen pays income tax to, quote, broaden the tax base. They say they want to do this to make sure everyone has skin in the game. To which I would say, skin in the game? Fuck you! The people pushing this nonsense have never faced material hardship in their lives. You're the ones who don't have any skin in the game. Moreover, the working class are already hit hardest by regressive taxes like sales tax. Let them keep their damn money. They'll need to spend it on necessities anyway, so you'll get your wretched cut soon enough. It is also worth pointing out the racial makeup of the mastaba. Proponents of our economic system like to think of modern capitalism as a colorblind marketplace of merit, but the demographics of the wealth in this country are stark. If you think about it for even a second, it's not hard to see how it happened. For white people, multi-generational wealth begets even more wealth, and with that wealth, educational and hiring advantages. For people of color, with each age there have been new forms of exploitation. The death of slavery gave way to sharecropping. The death of sharecropping gave way to prison labor. I'll not speak on this aspect beyond what I've said already, because I don't think I can do the history justice as a white guy, but it is undeniable that people of color have been, and continue to be, uniquely exploited in ways that we must reckon with as a society. This mastaba is not some inalienable natural order of things. Hoarding of this scale and nature does not occur. It is a deliberate construction, shaped by the work of millions of hands. As it is currently the firmly entrenched default economic ideology, it is obscenely easy to build, brick by brick. The mastaba's blueprint is deeply reflected in countless elements of our media and culture, and it is magnified by our greed and ignorance, as the higher mind rationalizes the harms away at light speed. It is the comfortable default lens those without meaningful material concerns enjoy without further introspection. But inspect we must. I put to you that we have a duty to not turn away from these harsh truths. that even beyond the clear evil of wealth gained by exploitation, all of us have within us the potential to be exploiters or accomplices. In order to attempt to live some semblance of a moral life, we must always consider our economic actions. From management decisions all the way down to how much we tip a server, these choices are in front of us. We certainly can't count on electoralism to change things, as has been proven repeatedly. The sum total of a person's moral output as it pertains to economics should not be summarized by, "they voted for Obama twice." Let's circle back to another specific aspect of the fabricated hierarchy, the neoliberal myth of salvation for the working class lying in sending everyone to college. This myth breaks down for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, the propagators of this myth generally have no real interest in making higher education universal. And why would they? They recognize that it would give them more competition, which would drive down their pay and lower their relative prestige. It is yet another element of their farce. They want to reap the social rewards of being on the right side while tacitly refusing to give up any shred of their economic privilege. Moreover, even if everyone had college degrees, who's to say that that by itself would cause more high-paying jobs to be spontaneously generated? We know where the unemployment rate is now, and even beyond it, the underemployment rate. Educating more of the country as a percent certainly hasn't led to some massive increase in jobs. Instead, it's not exactly an unknown economic phenomenon how employers made a college degree the new high school degree, slapping degree requirements on entry-level jobs that have no business requiring them, seeking to filter out people they see as lesser. What's next? Master's degrees for entry-level positions? We must reject this framing in all its forms. Society is for everybody, not merely the college-educated. The work that is done by those cynically dubbed essential workers by the powers that be is hard work, for little reward. They deserve more than merely a living wage. They deserve economic emancipation. One day we may be lucky enough to move beyond the outdated notion that a person's value is derived only from their work, and secure a universal basic income for everybody. But for now, the fight for the dignity of the worker continues, even in these dark days. If you're interested in this fight, I would advise you to check out your local DSA chapter. See for yourself that victories are possible, and get involved. If the knowledge of the depths of our hell world makes you sick to the very core of your being, I promise that you will feel better if you do something about it. I'd like to close this video by once again reaffirming the personhood of those in the working class. It is, in all meaningful respects, under constant assault. Both from the parties mentioned earlier, and even from members of the working class themselves who suffer from false consciousness. These people have not yet come to realize the extent of society's structures that are unfavorable to them. Yet we must not scorn or scold them. Though they serve vile masters, they may yet be comrades, and we need to meet them where they are and talk to them as equals, not as saviors from on high. Except for white supremacists, though, they can get fucked. Well, this one took a lot longer than I had bargained for. Sorry about that. This is also my first video made using DaVinci Resolve, which I'm pretty happy with overall, even if it feels a bit like the Blender of video editing software. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you in the next one.